Recognizing the member from Burnaby North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is truly an honour to rise in this chamber and speak in support of the speech from the throne. And I acknowledge that I am doing so from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. It has become part of our custom to acknowledge the First People on whose land we gather. And it's more than protocol. It's more than a ritualistic gesture. Every time I make the land acknowledgement, I reflect on what it means to be conducting our business on land that was taken. I reflect on how much the rituals that frame our work here and the symbols of power that surround us here are meant to be signals of dominance, of the enduring impact of colonialism. The irony that I am debating the speech from the throne is not lost on me. I'm proud to be part of a government that is determined not to let us forget the injustices of the past and the injustices that have been perpetrated on others in our name. I'm proud that we have passed legislation that embeds reconciliation in everything we do. We knew it wouldn't be easy. We knew we would encounter complications we couldn't begin to anticipate. We knew that in this age of instant gratification, it would be hard for some to accept why we didn't just go ahead and exert our power to make what seemed to be the right decision. Many would have applauded us for it. I'm proud to be part of a government that chose to do what was right rather than what might have been politically expedient. And sometimes doing what is right takes longer. Ours is a government that is committed to a better future for every British Columbian. Generations of British Columbians have witnessed Band-Aid fixes to social and economic inequities that are systemic in nature. Band-Aids might look impressive, but do little to stop a hemorrhage. I still have a supply of Barbie and Spider-Man Band-Aids in my medicine cabinet from when my grandchildren were toddlers. Sometimes they like to decorate themselves with them, and it made them feel better. But they're teenagers now, and they take a more holistic approach to their health. They know that they have to pay attention to what they eat, get enough sleep, exercise their bodies. They know that their bodies are machines with integrated parts. They know the difference between symptoms and causes. And they know that building stronger muscles, straightening their teeth, and combating teenage acne takes time and discipline. There are no magic wands. And our government knows that the same is true of fixing the inequities and insecurities embedded in our socioeconomic system. We won't be stampeded into putting Band-Aids on the surface of deeper systemic problems. In the spirit of reconciliation, I also want to acknowledge that I live and my constituency is located on the unceded traditional territory of Hukkamayman-speaking people, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, the people of the Inlet, who, according to archaeological evidence and their own oral history, have been stewards of their traditional territory for thousands of years. Before contact with Europeans, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation was about 10,000 members strong. It was a distinct Coast Salish nation. Its territory included the Burrard Inlet and the waters draining into it. Prior to European contact, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation was a land of plenty, with abundant fish and game to sustain themselves and their First Nations neighbours with whom they partnered through marriage and protocol. These are the words of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Their ancestors Survival depended on cycles of hunting, harvesting, and preserving foods, and on trades with their neighbors. Their people lived by a seasonal round, a complex cycle of food gathering and spiritual and cultural activities that formed the heart of their culture. In winter, community members congregated in large villages located in sheltered bays. Shed-roofed houses of up to several hundred feet in length were divided into individual family apartments. They subsisted largely on stored, dried foods, gathered and processed throughout the rest of the year. Winter activities included wood carving, weaving blankets of mountain goat wool, and participating in spiritual ceremonies. In late spring, families would disperse to set up camps on, including what is now Burnaby North, on virtually every beach and protected cove in Tsleil-Waututh territory. People transported planks from the winter houses by canoe to construct smaller summer structures. From these base camps, they made excursions to hunt, fish, and gather food as resources became seasonably available. Some food was consumed immediately. Others were processed and stored for winter. In mid-July or early August, most of the Tsleil-Waututh and other Coast Salish groups traveled to the Fraser River to catch and dry the most favored type of salmon, sockeye. During this time, people would visit, exchange news of relatives, and form alliances. They also harvested and dried large volumes of berries during the summer. After the Fraser River Run finished in the fall, Tsleil-Waututh families would congregate in camps on the Indian, Capilano, Seymour, and other rivers to fish for pink and chum salmon. Most of the catch was dried for winter use or trade. By December, families returned to their winter villages with the provisions collected throughout the year, and the cycle began again. This was an ancient, complex, and sophisticated society, and it was devastated by contact with Europeans. The majority of the population was decimated by disease, primarily smallpox. Residential schools, cultural suppression, the reserve system, colonialism further fractured the economic base and social cohesiveness. The Tsleil-Waututh remind us that they never ceded or relinquished their responsibility for this territory, but they also remind us that its resources have been exploited and damaged through industrialization and urbanization. They remind us that their nation holds Aboriginal title over what is now a highly urbanized area, which they share with many private and public interests. And thus their land claim under the treaty process is complex for this reason. Yet they continue to be guided by their birthright and sense of obligation as Tsleil-Waututh people to care for the lands and waters of their territory to ensure future generations can thrive here. A birthright that has compelled the Tsleil-Waututh Nation to establish a Sacred Trust initiative. Their Sacred Trust is mandated to stop the proposed Trans Mountain expansion. They have fought it in the courts, on the land, and on the water. And they have support of many settlers who live on my side of the inlet in Burnaby North, many of whom have chosen to serve jail time rather than get out of the way of such an ill-advised, out-of-date, massive fossil fuel project. I am proud to say that as a newly elected MLA, I was invited to join the Tsleil-Waututh on their Mother's Day paddle. In an armada of huge ocean-going canoes, we paddled across the inlet to the West Ridge Terminal to express our opposition to the expansion of the TMX pipeline. I will remember that experience as a highlight of being an MLA. I hope the Tsleil-Waututh are successful in stopping the TMX pipeline. When they win, we all win. The planet is depending on them. I'd like to thank my constituency office staff for their professionalism, compassion, and commitment to uniting our community. It's been a difficult couple of years. They are frontline workers. The volume of calls and emails has increased dramatically. The problems and questions constituents have brought to my office have become more complex and intense. There is more at stake for them. Mine is a very engaged electorate. My staff has gone above and beyond to assist them and involve them. Parisa Chan has been instrumental in building relationships with Burnaby North's very large Chinese-speaking community. This year, my office hosted a virtual Lunar New Year celebration online. It was largely volunteer-driven by constituents. Constituents from a wide range of Asian cultures shared their New Year traditions and fond memories, and we shared some good laughs. I was honored to be invited virtually into some homes to see how they decorated for Lunar New Year and what the decorations symbolized. Everyone was pretty intrigued by one participant's demonstration of her pseudo firecrackers. Totally safe, but loud enough to scare away the monster. Parisa also takes the lead on outreach, and as soon as the weather permits, we will be back out in the parks with our mobile constituency office, canvassing in person and by phone, and finding other creative ways to engage constituents. Nairi Caracas, who thought she was joining us last fall in a part-time capacity, found herself immediately stepping into the full-time position. I thank her for her willingness to pivot in an emergency and her commitment to serve constituents efficiently and conscientiously. She is relentless in her pursuit of information and answers that constituents request. Kyle Cattler is the newest and youngest member of our team. He has deep roots in Burnaby North and lived experiences that should create strong bonds with younger members of our community. I look forward to having a more ambitious plan for engaging students and being guided in a concrete, tangible way by their articulated hopes and fears. They are our future. I would also like to thank my family. They are my inspiration, my anchor, my reality check, and a source of joy that keeps me going. I miss them dearly while I'm in Victoria, and I can't wait to get home to hear all about their adventures, dramas, and triumphs. As you may know, we now live in a multi-generational household, and this is how we are coping with the housing crisis. My husband and I live on one floor, our son and his family live on another, and we share a laundry room, workspace, TV room, and supposedly the garage. We know we are extremely lucky and privileged to be in a position to transform our home in this way. And we know that it is not a solution that would work for most at this time. But I'm confident that our government is working every day to find and support creative solutions to the lack of affordable housing, and we will be successful. I also want to thank my community. The people of Burnaby North came together early in the pandemic to take care of each other. It was confusing in the beginning. When to wear a mask, where to wear a mask, how to wear a mask, what surfaces should be sanitized and how often. People made mistakes until they got into the rhythm of living in a pandemic. And for the most part, people in my community have been very tolerant of each other. I remember feeling a bit anxious early in the pandemic about the number of people who were going about their business without masks. And then it seemed almost overnight that I saw everyone, every age, wearing masks on Hastings Street in Burnaby Heights, waiting to cross the street, lining up to shop in our delis, bakeries, and greengrocers, and at ATMs, just walking down the crowded street. I have heard anecdotal stories of people policing each other's behavior perhaps a bit too enthusiastically and intrusively, but for the most part, I saw people being very patient with each other. On the other hand, the increased instances of racial hostility, particularly to women of Asian descent, has been very disturbing. I heard stories of Asian women being called names on buses, publicly humiliated, people refusing to sit beside them. I heard stories of Asian women being swarmed on SkyTrain platforms. As one constituent told me, what hurt her the most was the silence and the apparent complicity of other passengers. So, some members of my community decided to do something about that. We gathered at my community office and made signs that said, "I won't mind my business when I see racism. Anti-racism is everybody's business." Or, "See something, say something." Or, "Be more than a bystander. Stand with Asians. Stop racism." And we walked over to the Brentwood SkyTrain station at rush hour and held up our signs where commuters were coming and going through the turnstiles. We did this every Friday afternoon, and the response from the traveling public was very positive. We encountered a few curious questions, but no hostility. And there are so many other ways that people of Burnaby North have stepped up to take care of each other. We have consistently had one of the highest vaccination rates. First, the vaccine clinic at what is now called the Christine Sinclair Centre, and then the drive-through vaccination centre at BCIT, both located in Burnaby North, moved people through so efficiently and with such professionalism. So many of my constituents were vaccinated and or tested at these locations, and they were impressed and reassured by their experience. I also want to give a shout out to the Burnaby Primary Care Network. I remember being invited to a Zoom meeting early in the pandemic. It became a regular weekly meeting of frontline service providing organizations like Burnaby Family Life, the North Burnaby Neighbourhood House, Burnaby Division of Family Practice, Progressive Housing, Burnaby Community Services, Mosaic, Burnaby Community Schools. And they came together weekly to identify potentially vulnerable sectors of our community: the homeless, seniors living alone, new immigrants, renters, women facing domestic violence, people who'd lost their incomes, or were otherwise living on the edge. We began meeting regularly to explore and implement solutions and supports. The Burnaby Division of Family Practice played a leadership role, and I remember asking them, what is the Burnaby Primary Care Network, and where does it fit into these meetings that we're having every week? And the answer was, this is the Burnaby Primary Care Network. The Burnaby Primary Care Network is the community, and it is a model that is unique to Burnaby and one that other communities hope to emulate. I want to thank the Burnaby firefighters and North Burnaby Neighbourhood House for mobilizing such a massive scale to make sure every family had enough nutritious food to get through the crisis. My husband and I were so moved by this outpouring of the community stepping up to help each other that we began making regular deliveries on behalf of the Food Hub. And I want to give a special shout out to a healthcare worker who, after a 16-hour shift, stood in line at Costco for more than an hour so she could buy food to donate to the Burnaby Food Hub. Speaker, the willingness and capacity for citizens to take care of each other is a hallmark of civilization. Some hearing me say this might be thinking, but I thought it was the role of government. I thought it was your job to take care of us. I thought you were opposed to previous governments' hands-off, let the market decide, survival of the fittest approach to governing. I think the role of government is to provide a socioeconomic framework, an infrastructure within which people and families can make the decisions that will allow them to thrive and feel mutually connected and safe with their neighbours. I think the role of government is to create an environment within which members of society don't feel they must compete with each other for limited resources in order to just survive. I think the role of government is to create an environment that promotes social solidarity. And, Mr. Speaker, this throne speech lays the groundwork for a future in British Columbia in which everyone can be confident they will thrive, knowing they will do so because everyone else is thriving too. Some members have sneered at this throne speech. They've called it empty rhetoric that lacks detail. But with due respect, I disagree, Mr. Speaker. This throne speech does what throne speeches are designed to do. It spells out the direction our government intends to take. And yes, it does represent a course correction. It corrects the dog-eat-dog, survival of the fittest direction which has been, the people of British Columbia have been taking for generations. So let's take another look at the throne speech with that perspective in mind. The throne speech highlights government's plan to support people, whether they are rebuilding after fires and floods or simply getting through this difficult wave of COVID-19, keeping people healthy and safe through the rest of the pandemic, and building a people-centred recovery will continue to be top priorities for the government. BC has one of the highest vaccination rates in North America and the strongest economic recovery in Canada, with more people working today than when the pandemic hit. And that's why our focus has been and will continue to be on investing to help make life better for people. In the year ahead, government will continue to improve health care, fight climate change, and help communities prepare for extreme weather, make everyday life more affordable, and train people for the jobs of the future. More BC families will have access to affordable housing and childcare as we are doubling the number of $10 a day spaces, cutting childcare fees for many families in half, and increasing the supply of homes for middle-class families. Regular and reliable increases to minimum wage will build on actions to bring down the cost of living, like eliminating MSP premiums and reducing ICBC rates by an average of almost $500 a year. Our government knows we can't cut our way to a better future. Building a stronger BC is not about pulling back, it's about moving us forward together. We have been through a lot together, and no doubt there will be more challenges ahead. But if we look out for each other, we have shown we can overcome anything that gets thrown our way. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm excited about what British Columbians can do together in the coming years to secure a safe, healthy, comfortable future for everyone. We are fortunate to have a government at this historic time who has a vision of a just and equal society and the wherewithal to make it happen. Thank you.